Okay, go ahead.
I'm Landon Leininger, biomedical engineering 4th year BSMS, and I'm a small group leader for the first time this year.
I'm Jazziel. I am a 3rd year marketing student, and I'm on the worship team and the outreach team.
I am Amanda. I am a 3rd year chemical engineering student, and I am leading a small group for the first time this year.
Hi, my name is Gavin Clark, 3rd year music industry major, and I'm leading a small group for the first time. Dang, I got one.
What is it?
Alright, so I'd say being real about identity, I think, is a big thing. I think it's hard for a lot of people, like, not understanding, like, if people don't understand the purpose, I guess, that God has given for their life, it's hard for people to identify who they're supposed to be, or just have trouble in general with understanding, again, their identity. And without, I guess, understanding that, it's harder for people to be real about it, because they just don't have a general understanding.
Yeah, I think people are trying to be real as best they can, but I think that, especially with identity, being real in this generation, doesn't matter which way you lean, left or right, is not the point, but I think it's a manifestation of where society is headed, and because we're going to a darker place in society, I think we're looking for alternative routes to find our identity, like you said, Gavin. And I don't think that they're trying to be as real as they feel they can be, but they're always falling short, right? Because unless you're creating your identity in Christ, you're never going to, it doesn't matter what you label yourself, it's not going to be what God intended for you. So.
Right.
Yeah, I think another way that manifests is because, like, it's so hard to know your own identity and know, like, who you are, what you stand for. Another way that it happens in, like, social media is so much of our lives are online, and so we try and say, all right, I'm going to sum up my entire identity in this 10-second snap, in this 10-picture post, in this one, whatever, tweet, and this is my identity in this small frame, and it's so hard to capture that we end up having a hard time being real about our identity, or even, like, our wins and our fails. I have a hard time, at least, like, being honest with my fails and being like, I didn't do this great.
Yeah, I think, like, a lot of it, even in the context of college specifically, can, like, boil down to having a hard time, like, being real about how all those different things that we kind of go to place our identity in aren't really satisfying. Especially, I remember, like, coming into freshman year of college, like, everyone was just doing, like, so much. Like, there's so much going on. There's always an event to go to. Like, someone's always having something. I don't know, whether it be, like, in their room. Like, there's just always something going on. And I think a lot of those friends that I made that first year, like, a lot of us, like, we were real about so many things. And, like, especially we're so much more open about mental health, like, so many things in our generation, but we have a hard time being real about how unsatisfying a lot of that stuff is. Like, we don't, like, we're all kind of feeling it and continue going to things more to try to make us feel better, but the one thing that we have a really hard time saying is, I'm not actually satisfied or happy.
Yeah. I think you sum it up, because I was originally going to say mental health, but, like, I think as a society, we're becoming more understanding of those things, and we can bring them up in conversation and talk about it. So, like, in that sense, I think we're being more real with ourselves and acknowledging the problem. But, like you said, we're not acknowledging
That we need help.
It's a more difficult problem.
Yeah.
We're not being vulnerable. I can say, oh, I have ADD and, it affects my life, but I'm not really saying, I have ADD and I struggle to focus on my homework and I need help. Can somebody make sure that I do this thing? And have a hard time being real about our vulnerabilities.
The
Yeah.
accountability is
Yeah.
hard to find.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say specifically that I need help. Like, I think that's one of the biggest things that we have trouble being real about. It's like, once you put yourself in a position to not be the best person in the room, or to not be really, just like you said, to be vulnerable, that that's where things really get difficult about being real.
And we were kind of talking about this earlier, but it's been like, I guess, a year since like really starting to take God seriously. And I think I thought it would be something more between like me and God, but kind of that realizing like I need help. He's brought people in my life and like forced me to make close friendships with people, and that has brought me more healing than just like changing the way that I act, but like being like, I need help, and like I know that you, like God has like equipped you, or like the people I made, friends I've made, to be able to pour into me, and like that's what really ends up bringing around that accountability.
That's insane.
change.
Similar story for me. It's been like about a year since I've really started being serious and being like, all right, God, we're in this. Let's do this.
Mhm.
And same thing. It's been him going, I know I can help you. Obviously, you know I can help you, but go to real people. Go to your friends. Go to those around you, because I made a community for you. And you are choosing not to join it by saying, I don't need help. When you do. When I do, I need help.
Yeah.
And it's hard to be real about that.
I mean, before you can be truly real as a Christian, you're not going to receive all of not that you're not going to receive God's love, but you're not going to realize all that God is doing in your life, and you're not going to be willing for the change to happen. And that's why we're called to be real and be truthful with everything with God, but also, like you said, in the community with those around us. And there's a reason for that. And I think because in order for change and true relationship to happen and to deepen, you need to lay it all out there and be vulnerable, because without vulnerability, you're not opening up the walls that you've placed on your heart. And don't get me wrong, guarding your heart is very important, but I think that it's an interesting thing that we're called to do that as Christians, and it might seem counterintuitive at first, and that's why like society might, stray away from being truly open with somebody because they're afraid they're going to hurt their feelings or whatnot. And I'm not saying that can't happen in Christian settings, but I think that once you unlock what being real really means, like if Gavin and I know, we don't need to know everything about each other, but know that in conversation with each other, we're as honest as we can be.
Right.
That's only going to strengthen our bond with each other, and similarly how it strengthens your relationship with Jesus, being able to lay down everything on the cross and just acknowledge where you have failed in your life. And then by acknowledging, that's when the surrender happens. Like, yeah, God knows when you failed, but if you're not willing to admit your failure, you're really just telling God, I'm not willing to change this about myself. So I think that knowing the truth about the Lord for me comes down to two different things. There's theological truth, and then there's personal truth. And I think each draws on an important aspect of Christianity. People can argue theological truth all day. You can run circles around it as long as you want. But you can never deny. That's like why you say no one can ever take your testimony away from you, because nobody can deny your personal truth. And I think that as Christians, I would almost argue that, both have their place, but I would argue that personal truth is more meaningful, at least for me, because like I grew up after Christianity as a theological argument, and I'd always have doubts and always be like, okay, well, how can we be one religion if every other religion says they're the one religion, for example? And I think like that's the only approach I took to Christianity for a while. And I think this year in particular, like coming to ENC and like meeting all of you guys and building a deeper relationship, I've begun to understand and develop my personal truth with not only you guys as a community, but also my relationship with with Jesus and what he's done in my life. And I think at the end of the day, that holds more value in my heart than what any fact says.
I think the biggest component that we're really talking about here is experience. Just because with Christianity, like you said, there's theological truth. There's the facts, and I mean the facts are going to be the basis of everything. The truth is going to be the basis of everything, but the difference in how somebody would experience Christianity, again, it's the experience. So like if you're basing your experience on something that's not true, it'll change your experience versus something that is true. So I guess the best way to put it is like, some people will have a certain experience within a Christian community, and whether somebody does something wrong or whatever, it changes their experience of Christianity versus somebody who I guess is in a community that is doing the right thing in that circumstance. And I think it really boils down to experience.
Yeah.
And like, even kind of what you were saying about the theology and like how you can go around it in circles, like even honestly, like to this day, sometimes there will be days where I'm like, man, like from like a like logical perspective, it's like there are so many schools of thought where it's like people fall into them or follow them because it brings them comfort, or like some people will say, oh, like people, or just Christianity is just so popular because it brings people comfort in like their everyday life. Or even the thought of, well, of course if you raise a kid from birth to like adulthood to believe a certain thing, they're going to believe it. Like all of those like things, and I think doubts can continue to circulate, and especially in a culture where it is hard to know your identity, it can like continue circulating. But like you were saying, that experience and that personal truth, I think what really is what solidifies like knowing the truth of who the Lord is, and knowing that truth about God, because there's nothing else that I have found or experienced, like even looking through so many like self-help podcasts. Actually, funny enough, when I was trying to start just like that self-healing journey, I wasn't really paying attention that much to Christianity because I was like, I've grown up in it, I need to find the real truth. And I started doing a lot of like self-help things, and whether that was, I don't know, like angel numbers, like just random like stuff, and podcasts and YouTube videos that were super helpful. But like ultimately it ended up leading me back to Jesus, and a light bulb kind of went off where I was like, all of the principles that are taught in scriptures are really lining up with all these things that I've been learning. And in addition to that, when you start finding the truth of the Lord, just through spending personal time, like whether that's praying or meeting with people who love God, you find that it kind of digs the dirt out of you and brings healing and love and help, like real help, and like the truth of God is really found in the fruit of your experience. I think
to add on to that, like I have had so much experience with Christianity that starting my, I guess, healing journey, I was like, I'm gonna take a break, I'm gonna take a step back, because what else is out there? What else could exist? And I read this book, The Art of Happiness. It was written with the Dalai Lama, and also like The Power of Now. And both of these books had a lot of universal truths that were like, exist in the now, be honest, be kind to others, value those around you. And they had those universal truths, but that's kind of where they stopped. And I realized that Christianity was a thing that gave a why to like why those things that are so I guess popular in every type of religion. I mean, like look at how much spirituality in the world right now is happening, but there's no why for that. And
it's like it stay abstract.
Yeah, it stays abstract, and Christianity is given like a concrete thing. There have recently been so many health benefits from intermittent fasting, which is where you only eat like 8 hours a day, and then you fast for like 16. And that was a biblical tradition that people in the Bible, throughout the Bible, have like followed and done as this, you know, religious thing. And now we're finding that there's ridiculous amounts of health benefits to it. Like, our God is a personal God, and he doesn't make up these religious things for funsies. Like, he's saying, hey, like, Jews, wash your food and don't eat meat because you don't have the health stuff to deal with all of the pesticides, or not pesticides, but all the bacteria and stuff, right? And like, as we get past this, like, the laws change, but our God is a personal God, and how we experience him is individual for everyone.
Yeah.
And then another thing that can like differentiate kind of like what you were alluding to is the purpose behind everything, and the fact that like in a lot of those other, I guess, like self-help, like self-growth, or even other like religions, a lot of it is like either growing like for your own personal gains, like you'll be right with God and you know that you'll be saved through what you do, or just for you to reach a point of whether it be like enlightenment or to have like a really good state of being in the next life. Whereas like Christianity is different because one, like, you're not saved by what you do, but secondly, you improving is one, like bringing glory to God, but two is more so for the people around you than for you yourself as a person. And I think that's one of the main like differentiating factors. It's really not always about what's best for you. A lot of Christianity has to do with like doing what you don't want to do for the greater good.
Which ends up somehow benefiting you. Like it all centers on God instead of you. But when you center on God, you follow God's plan, and your life ends up being better because of it. Sure, it's harder, and I mean, there are always ups and downs, but when you trust solely yourself, you put yourself in the center, just say, I'm going to do these good so that I'm saved, it can lead you away from the truth.
And I think a big thing is God has designed us for community. So when we have this whole self-healing process of trying to basically do things the opposite way of how God created it, that's why things go wrong. That's why people end up falling into what's not the truth, because again, God has designed us for community. We build up those around us and we love those around us, and that improves us. But when we try to build ourselves up and love ourselves more in order to put that out into the community, it just doesn't work, because that's not how God designed it.
Yeah. One thing I want to tag on to what you said is, like, following our own truth can lead us astray. And I think, like, one thing that I think about a lot is, you know, when we go to God in prayer, you know, we ask him things with whatever we're going through. Or just, like, in the day-to-day, like, sometimes I'll think, like, oh, is this God speaking or not God speaking? Is, like, what I'm hearing true or not true? Is it just, like, the devil whispering in my ear without me knowing? I would just, like, recommend for, like, those struggling between, like, what's true and what's false, like, the Bible was written for a reason, and you'd be surprised if you don't, like, think about this now, like, how much is in there. Like, it's the only book you ever need in your entire life to figure out how to be a Christian. And I think, you know, it says that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And if you just, like, look at what Jesus taught, it's not going to be easy to comprehend most of the time, because a lot of Jesus' teachings were in parables. But, like, if you truly study the word, that is the truth. And I think that, you know, like you said about looking to your own self-truth, like, a lot of the time when I'm trying to make a decision or rely on, like, what I think is right about a concept or a theory, or just, you know, anything that I'm thinking about, I tend to turn to myself first, and then I catch myself thinking, well, you know, I'm just a human, my thoughts are faulty, and I have inherent bias, like, I'm not a perfect human being, right? So I think I always supplement that with God's word, because and I would recommend for everyone else to do the same, and then supplement that with prayer.
I think like in speaking about all of this and like thinking about how we know the truth about God, and like learning to be more real, I think that the main difference between real and truth is like the subjectiveness,
Yeah.
maybe, versus the objectivity.
Yeah.
Like kind of how earlier, Landon, you were saying like no one can take away your personal like truth. It's almost like no one can take away your personal reality. Like if anyone's ever gone through like something where you've just been super like nervous about it, like the reality that like the truth could have been that you have like complete capability to get it done, but what's real to you is that you're not sure and it's a super high stress situation. So I think in the sense of like real and truth, there's like that truth about God that we find in his word and that we learn more as we spend more time with God, but the realness, which is really cool, like as you read more in the Bible, that God allows so much space for realness, is how we're feeling like dealing with and learning more about that truth, like whether it's like doubts, fears, even like having seasons where you're falling away or just unsure about God, but also like those seasons where you're just so on fire for God. Like that's the realness of it, but God's truth never changes.
Right. Yeah. Like, I mean, I think that's similar to even in just the gospel, right? We have 4 different real accounts, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, of what's happening and what it's like walking with Jesus. Those are all very real. Sure, there's one objective truth of what Jesus' life here on earth was like. We don't know that necessarily, but that doesn't mean that their versions aren't true. Each of those are real and true, but truth is often used as a singular, there's only one perspective that is true. Real can be more based on your perspective, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you along those lines. Like what I was going to say was truth has like a logical rigidity to it. Like it's either true or false. Like, okay, there's nothing else attached to truth other than that it exists or it doesn't exist, in that sense. Like it's like binary.
Yeah.
But realness has, at least the way I would describe it, as like an emotional foundation. Like if I, for example, like you were mentioning with the Gospels, right? They all had one singular truth, but Jesus was real to each and every one of them in different ways. Because like when I say God is real to me, or Jesus is real to me, at least when I think about it in that sense, like it's the emotional attachment that I have to our relationship and like knowing who he is on a deeper level.
Yeah.
It's just a byproduct of knowing that I'm experiencing the truth, in the sense that like knowing he is the Son of God, but being real and like knowing what's real.
It opens the door for a lot more grayness.
Yes, yeah, it's more nuanced because everyone's, like you said, with personal reality,
Right.
everyone's reality is different under the umbrella of the one truth.
Yeah.
So like,
The interesting thing. Oh.
no, you
The interesting thing about like humans, like I just randomly thought about this, is that even though like we know like that truth is objective, we all have the freedom to choose what we think is true. So it's like our like brains function outside of what is actually true. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like we know there's one truth, but like that one truth doesn't determine what we think. So like we can all think something else is true and like function in that being true and something else being real and subjective, but yeah, so I think it just opens up more. There's just so many levels of grayness.
Right.
Because even in truth, there's grayness. Because
Right.
if someone believes that all religions are like man-made, like solely man-made, and that's like to them that's true. That's the objective truth.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas like to us, like all being Christians, our objective truth is that God is real.
Right.
Yeah,
Like,
and
so
like,
it's just
just
it's
like
interesting.
with what all you guys are saying, I think it's really, that's why it's really important to have your reality based in the truth, the objective and solitary truth, because it's like when you have your reality based in something that's not the truth, that's what opens up the most, gray area, like y'all were saying, and just difficult and generally wrong directions. But when your reality is grounded in the truth, not only do you live a life in the purpose that God has designed for you, but it makes the experience of life so much better than having your reality grounded in falseness or in lies.
Yeah. Like to add on to your point, like I think you explained it very well in the sense that what we experience, what is true is how we experience, what we believe is true is how we experience reality. You're already deciding that you're not what you want to be, right? So like in Christianity, like when you are founded on the truth that you are made in God's image, which is the image of perfection, and like God's love and God's grace, when you don't screw up, or like when you screw up, sometimes you might think like, oh, I'm such a failure, but like as a Christian, I think it like redirects me in thinking, okay, well, I know the truth of who our God is and who Jesus is. So instead of thinking like, oh, I'm such a failure, like, I can admit that I messed up, but I also can have a more positive outlook because I know there's a God that will forgive me and that he can, change my actions moving forward.
I guess I could say one way is that, I mean, it's difficult on a college campus, one, to lead, but two, to lead in the truth. And I think as leaders, each one of us has different things that God has tailored us for. And so in knowing that, it's like if God has designed you to be a certain way to impact those around you a certain way, being as real as you can in that space that God has designed you to be in, it's going to speak to others who are also in that space as well. And even in the way college is designed by majors, by the different identities we basically place on ourselves for our careers and our future lives, being leaders and being real in those spaces is what allows for other people to enter that space and be real as well. So I think that.
Yeah, like about bringing your personal testimony into, really incorporating that into your leadership, just because we can debate the theological. I mean, we can all go home and do our homework, read the Bible, read up on other religions, see what differs, what doesn't, try and find that objective truth. But being real is just, I know how my life has happened, the events in my life, and they have affected me in a very specific way that no one else has been affected by. However, it can be very similar, and I've found this already. Some of the girls in the small group that I'm leading, they can have experienced similar experiences, and we can relate through that. And it's more about bringing that personal experience into it and saying, this was my personal experience with the church. Yikes. This is what changed. Or this was my personal experience with the church. It was awesome. Or this is my experience with people inside versus outside the church. Or it's just, to me at least, it's bringing my personal experience, saying, I don't know the answers, but God has given me 2 + 2, and it looks like he's given you 2 + 2. And let's just come together and see if 4 makes sense.
Okay. I think
like only I can give my experience to those who I'm leading. And I think, I'm just, speaking for guys in this instance, because obviously I don't lead guys, but I think being real is something very hard for guys to do, especially in this generation, because we're so caught up in like our pride and our ego, and it's very hard for us to see the benefit or the need to be humble. For me, adding that real aspect is what is going to build the relationship that I have with my small group members, and as a result, their trust in each other and hopefully with me is going to grow as a result of that. And obviously truth plays an important role as well. And before, I think I focused a lot on, because I am a leader, like, is what I'm saying like 100% accurate? Like, I may not be totally truthful, like I may have 90% truth mixed in with 10% falsity, but I don't know any better, et cetera, and just like worrying about these things. And I think like I really sat down and prayed with God, and he kind of like brought me to the conclusion that, let me deal with like what is true. Like, you have that in the Bible, like just focus on that. And really all I can do is speak about how the truth has impacted my life and has really built the foundation that I have with Jesus. And like you said, like nobody can take away that personal truth from you. So I think taking the weight off of your shoulders of being 100% theologically correct, and more so leading people, as Billy says in the ENC, and just like one of our ENC mottos is, as leaders, we're trying to teach people to become independently dependent on Christ. Like, we're not Christ himself. Like, we don't know everything that's truth. But by being real and developing those foundational relationships with the people in your small group, you're encouraging them to read the word, spend time with God, and he is going to lead them to those truths and to those personal experiences that really shape their relationship with him.
Nice. Amen. It's like leading in a way is like leaning more into like the realness of your relationship with God, and praying that other people get to experience that too.
Yeah.
It's funny, by leading, you end up being the example student, so that then the students can learn what a student of God looks like.